Okay, I think we're live now. Hi, everybody. I'm Carol Kauffman, founder of the Institute of Coaching with Margaret Moore and Susan David, and also a senior leadership advisor here at Egon Zender. And I am with one of my favorite people, Liz Wiseman, who has multiple identities. She's a researcher, she's an author, like an actual best-selling author like New York Times as well as Wall Street Journal with her book Multipliers, this one Impact Players. And she draws on multiple identities as a real researcher and author, but also from her 17 years at Oracle working with talent development. So, Liz, to start, do you want to kind of introduce us to the basic ideas of impact players, and then we'll see where the conversation goes.
Well, impact players is a concept I really borrowed from the the sports world. And we all know that there are standout contributors on any team who make not only an extraordinarily valuable contribution themselves, they make the entire team better. People tend to play better with that person on their team. And the impact of the workforce and the work world is full of impact players as well. And what I was trying to do was understand, like, who are the people who are making an extraordinary difference, and what do they do differently than everyone else? And particularly, like, in a room full of equally smart, talented, hardworking people, why are some people like really making an impact and other people are stuck going through the motions? Like, what's the difference between the difference maker and a position holder inside of an organization?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like someone who at the table really contributes to the conversation and which people change the conversation.
Yeah.
One of the things I really loved was you're talking about how it really democratizes leadership, because it's not this one group is smarter, better, more connected. It's that this group has behaviors they do that they can learn. And why don't you talk about what some of the behaviors, I have those 5 cool kind of behaviors, we can start there and then back up.
Yeah. So, here's what we found that they do differently. And I should probably kind of just frame this in the nature of the research. So, I went out to 9 top employers, some in tech, some in consumer goods, some in healthcare and biotech. And we asked 170 managers, tell us about 2 different people on your team, both of whom are smart, capable, and hardworking, but one of whom is like doing a fine job, like a rock solid contributor. In some ways, like someone you would love to have 10 of these people on your team. Someone who's rock solid versus someone who's making an extraordinary impact, delivering work of like inordinate value relative to everyone else. And then we compared the difference in the behaviors and mindsets. And what we found, kind of in summary, what we found was that these ordinary contributors, they did their job. They did their job well. They followed direction. They were focused. They took responsibility. They carried their weight on teams. Like, in many ways, they were stellar in ordinary times. But when situations got uncertain, chaotic, out of your control, like full of ambiguity, that's when the ordinary contributors fall short. And that's when their way of thinking and working tends to fall short. And there are 5 situations that really differentiated them. And Carol, you told me you came up with a nice acronym for remembering these, and I'm going to use them to make sure I remember them.
Okay. Yes.
So the first is, so it's moo, right?
MUU.
Yeah, MUU. The first is messy problems. Like, and when the situation full of messy problems is not his job, her job, like the ordinary contributor does their job in these situations, and they do their job brilliantly, but the impact players do the job that needs to be done. Like, they venture out of their swim lane and go out to where the problem or opportunity is. The second situation is when roles are unclear. Like, we're collaborating, but we're not entirely sure who's in charge. Like, who's really driving this? Who do we look to initiate things? In those situations, the rock solid contributor waits for direction. They wait for role clarification. They look for, like, is it like a racy, like who's, like somebody tell us who's in charge. Whereas the impact player, they step up
Mhm.
and
You know what you said that I love in the book?
Mhm.
Or no, maybe you said it on one of your podcasts, which is the impact players fill the white space in the org chart.
They do. And, it's like we build these organizations and we like box out roles, work stream jobs, and it's just all really yesterday's problems. It's very much like when you go through a TSA security line, and that whole system is built to solve last year's threats, but not this year's threats. And I think our organizations are very similar, is that we box these responsibilities, but that's for the known problems, the known work streams. And most of the real value is in the new stuff. Like, what is this new thing that just dropped in on us? How do we organize ourselves for it? It's in the white space, and they go into that space, which is messy and uncertain. So, they step up, they take the lead, but they're also as willing to step back. And there's like some beauty in this. This is one of the favorite things I saw was the fluidity which they step in and out of leadership roles. And the third is when they're dealing with unforeseen obstacles. The ordinary contributor takes responsibility, but as soon as things get really like above their pay grade, out of their control, like they send it out of their hands. They tend to escalate up. Whereas the impact player just holds on to that ownership, and they tend to finish all the way done. They finish stronger. And then when it comes to moving targets, when you're shooting at a goal and the goal is moving while you're shooting at it and everything is changing around you, the ordinary contributors tend to stick to it. They stick to their goals. They stick to what they know. Whereas the impact players are adapting and adjusting. Rather than sticking to their guns, they're adjusting their aim. And then lastly, when, like work is just full of unrelenting demands, just like where the workload is increasing faster than the resources increasing. Like for me, what feels like every day of my work life, the ordinary contributors tend to look for help. They look for relief from their team, from their bosses, whereas the impact players, they make work light. And it's not like they take other people's work. It's that they just bring a lightness that allows us to carry heavier loads. They're easy to work with. They're low maintenance. They bring a sense of levity that like just makes hard work fun.
So the MUU was, again, is that things are messy. And so guys, think about yourselves as coaches in two ways here. One is help, I think the MU is a little crisper than VUCA. And so on one hand, how to be thinking about when you're facing a really complicated coaching engagement yourself, and then how your client is facing things. So it's like one that it's messy, but that's not just messy, it's also unclear. But wait, there's more. It's unforeseen. It's the you don't know what you don't know category and how you suddenly manage at that moment. So they're messy, unclear, unforeseen, and oh yeah, moving. Now, I think this really applies to us as coaches. Sort of a decade ago or two, decade ago, I wrote the What Coaches Can Do for You for HBR, and we interviewed 200 people, 200 coaches. Only 8 said that the goals didn't shift. So this really applies to us to kind of keep up with our client. And then, of course, it's unrelenting. Now, all of this, Liz puts together. So first of all, you've got to read her book. When you read those books and you go, oh, this is really like an article stretched into a book. For Liz's book, this one, and Multipliers, each chapter could be a book. And not only could it be a book for thought leadership that's evidence-based, but it's also a guidebook. But my favorite is chapter 7. So get the book and look at chapter 7, which is basically how to coach someone through this. And Liz, do you want to walk us through kind of the two kind of basic mindset and orientations that are,
Yeah. And
you
first
know,
of all, let me tell you kind of how I got to chapter 7, because as I'm writing this book and doing the research and synthesizing, I'm like, wow, I've unpacked like what these impact players do, but it's a big long list of things to do and mindsets. It's like a bundle of about 20 kinds of things. I'm like, I can't do 20 things. I can't even do 20 things that I've been studying for the last 4 years. And so what I did was look for what maybe it's autobiographical, which is I am like mere mortal. Like I can't adopt all of this and make these kinds of changes. So what's really at the root of this? What's kind of the stem cell of this mindset? And really, like if you're going to help someone increase their impact, like there's two fundamental like mindsets to master. And the first is how to see things from other people's perspective. It's all about learning to see value. You can't really you can't have impact unless you understand like the target and what's valuable to your stakeholders, to your clients, to the people that you serve or that your work serves. And so it's learning to see through the eyes of the people that you work on behalf of. What's important to them? What is hurting for them? What problems aren't they able to solve? Like, what does the world look like from their perspective? We
mhm.
tend to do our work from here's my job, here's my point of view on what I see and how to do my job. But the impact player is constantly pulling in views from the people around them. Like
So
they,
see what you're doing? This is really interesting because what I was thinking is it's 360 design thinking. You're really talking about putting yourself into the other person's shoes, or as I think you say, you don't just expand your view, zoom in, zoom out, you sit in the other chair.
yeah,
And one of the examples which I really like is if you listen longer, you understand what problems you're really needing to fix. And so anyway, tell us more about that.
oh, I've listened longer. And, this is a principle that I learned from Michael Bungay Stanier, who I think a lot of
Mm.
coaches know as well. Like, can you just stay curious a little longer? Can you listen longer? And when I'm doing my interviews, I'm interviewing, several dozen of these impact players in extreme depth. We identified 170, and then I really kind of zoomed in on about 30 of them. And Paulo Butenbender is a software architect for SAP down in Brazil. And I grew up amongst software architects, and I kind of know how most work, which is like, oh, I'm building a piece of code. Let me understand what the users need. Let me, let me spend 15 minutes understanding the need and let me go build this. And Paulo, when he meets with a client and he's going to architect a system for them, he spends a lot of time in listening mode. And when I asked him, because that was his reputation, is like, Paulo listens. He listens longer than other software architects. Well, Paulo, how long? He says, well, I usually start with a week,
Yeah.
like a week of meetings. And he goes, well, no, I'd like to just stay in listening mode for a week. I'm like a 5-day week, like 8 hours a day, 5 days. He goes, yeah, like we usually do meetings about 4 to 6 hours a day. And I just resist offering any solutions to the client until I spend about a week listening to their problems.
Wow.
And I'm like, wow, like I need to see things from their perspective for me to build a system that delivers value to them. And I like to think of it as like moving out of having like hawk eyes where you like zoom in on a target. And there's a place for having kind of like hawk vision, like really focused, and developing like moving beyond hawk eyes to lizard eyes. A lot of reptiles have a third eye at the top of their head where they can see like
They do?
they do. They do. And it allows them not just to see what's happening around them and on the ground, but what's happening above them. Like think
Wow.
about hawks operate up here, lizards, they're down here. And so they have this ability to see above them. And then I think about moving from hawk eyes to lizard eyes to butterfly eyes, like these species that have compound eyes that see really in 360 degrees. They're like the little, Google cars that are, taking an image of everything around them in 360 degrees. And of course, it allows that butterfly to see, oh, nectar here, nectar there. They're seeing opportunities for value. And I think that's what we need to increase our impact. We need to be able to see things from multiple perspective. And this is actually one where coaches can add an extraordinary amount of value in helping people like expand their vision. Well, what does it look like to that person? Well, like if I were talking to this person on your team, what might be her perspective on this issue?
Mhm.
Why do you?
We have an interesting comment here from Andrea Levin-Marcon. She was talking about systems thinking, that you're really also talking about a whole systems perspective. And anyway, that I think that is really, I think that's right, Andrea. Thanks.
Mhm. And it is one of the master skills. Like if you build this muscle, this vision, this kind of thinking, so many of the other kinds of mindsets and behaviors just naturally follow. It's like we follow what we see, like, oh, wow, now that I see that, it's so obvious what I need to do. And expanding our vision allows us to get out of our own head of what's frustrating us about what other people are doing or not doing.
I'd love for you to talk about the other part of it. So the master the underlying beliefs. So all the stuff that you talk about really going into master underlying beliefs and you becoming a researcher to your own change by gather supporting evidence. So within master underlying beliefs, I'm looking at an outline of the chapter, guys. So it's changing your perspective, okay? But it also is changing your lens. I'd love for you to talk about, I love this image of convex or concave. Do you want to tell people about that?
Oh, yeah. So, this is about like the term I use is that
You take off your glasses when you say that.
I know it's like, because I think of goggles, like impact players, like the conclusion I came to in looking at all this evidence was that they wear opportunity goggles. And I like the image of goggles because like, it's not like they're delusional. It's not like they're wearing happy shades. It's like, I'm looking at the situation. It's messy. It's ugly. And the truth is, I don't like it. I don't like it when things are uncertain and messy. Like very few people love it, but it's this ability to sort of put these goggles on and say, let me see if I can not find sunshine in this situation. How do I find an opportunity to add value? Like, man, if something unprecedented just dropped in, like, okay, maybe this is an opportunity for us to do things differently. Like I remember when the pandemic hit and I was teaching this class for high schoolers and like chaos, happens. Everyone's off now doing online training. And I'm like, wow, like nobody's telling us how to do this. This is this little extra morning class I teach for high schoolers just because I'm a glutton for punishment and we all need opportunity to stay deeply humble. So I'm like, well, nobody seems to be in charge. All this is unprecedented. No one's telling me what I can and can't do. Like, I'm going to just reinvent what we're doing. This is actually not a bummer. This is an opportunity to radically change the way we're doing it. Like, yes, it sucks, but it presents some sort of opportunity. And it's this ability, like literally to take on and off these goggles. And I think this is something that's really a place where coaches can add extraordinary value because doing this often requires like really cognitive, like reframing. Like, how am I seeing the situation? Is it possible that there might be an alternative way to look at this situation? And I think we can recognize I'm in an ambiguous situation. What lens am I using? What if I put on a different lens? What does it look like? What might I do?
That's interesting because one of the big things, so for those of you who are fellows, you may or may not know, I hope you do, that we have numbers of fellows meetings, like 3 a week, where we do huddles and talk. And that came from, and now it's a big thing that we offer, but it happened because Margaret Moore and our executive director were away when the pandemic hit. I was in this group with Marshall that they all started meeting. I'm like, this is what we should do at the Institute. So we just started and they've been incredibly helpful. So if you are a fellow, make sure you know about the huddles. They're wonderful. They're wonderful. Yeah. And you'll also, you shouldn't be, but you will be, no matter how smart you think the rest of us are in the huddles when you get to know your fellows, they're so friggin' smart. and they all write things and publish and talk about them. But describe the concave, convex, and then let's flip into the gathering supporting evidence, because I really love that also, because it's sort of like a fractal, you as the researcher, and then shifting that for you as the person who wants to change how to be a researcher.
Yeah. Like as I got this image that the ordinary contributor, like when we look through a threat lens, it's like everything closes in on us. And that is like a convex lens. I think I'm getting, okay.
You're right.
I'm nervous. I've got that
convex.
It's this
no, I think maybe somebody will put it in the channel, but one or the other.
Well, someone put this in chat because I've just gotten myself confused.
I think concave, I don't know. I think concave, convex, I have no idea. Anyway.
We're going to say, I think it is concave. Like concave is when like.
Whatever. There are two lenses, whichever one is.
There's two lenses.
The point is light goes like this or light goes.
One brings light in, like, because I'm failing the physics test right now.
No, it's a vocabulary test. We're only failing the vocabulary
test. I guess I do understand the physics.
Desperately looking in the chat here, guys, if someone knows.
Did anyone save us in the chat, Carol?
I'm not going to save us. Anyway,
have some mercy.
Moving on.
And
concept counts.
Yeah. And it's like the light that like comes in and focuses. That's right. Concave, think cave. It goes in. Jim, thank you for that.
Jim.
And it's like, that's like looking through this.
Oh, look at that. Lens. Converge or diverge. I like that. Okay. Yeah. Now we've got it. Next time.
And so what happens is when we're seeing this threat, like our world tends to like cave in on us and our vision narrows. And what we tend to focus on is ourselves. Like, what is the impact to me? How might this hurt me? And when we see through this convex lens, like this more divergent lens, our vision expands and we start to see like broader than what does the threat look like to me? It's like, well, what is the opportunity to create value for others? And most of the time when we create value for others, it creates value for us. And certainly when we do that well and with savvy. And so it's this more expansive view. And, in some ways it's as simple as like, how is this an opportunity to create value for someone else? How is this an opportunity to demonstrate leadership? How is this an opportunity to reinvent? How is this an opportunity to do to like build new capabilities and build belonging and a sense of teamwork? And when we look through that lens, we tend to do things that are impactful.
Okay, I'm just noticing the time and I'm dying for you to get to the next part, which is, so guys, so first of all, I think you can all hear how these inform coaching questions. But one thing that Liz does, which I really, really love, is how you can help your client design these experiments. And a line from her book I love, which says, nascent behavior and beliefs are fragile. So I think you give an example of someone who decides they're going to like not lead from the front, and then they realize they get no credit and they're unhappy, so they revert, as opposed to the other person about listening. So do you want to talk about your sort of minimum viable product approach?
Oh, yeah. It's really this idea that like, and I love, Keegan and Leahy's work about immunity to change and like what pulls us backward? What is this competing thing? And like the fragility of trying new things. And like, we have to build support structures around them. And the image I get is like a little sapling that has the rings around it and these structures around it to just strengthen it until it builds strength enough to stand on its own, as a tree and withstand the gales and the forces in the weather. And like to do this is we have to pile up more evidence in support of the new belief than in the old. It's very much like prosecuting in a trial, which is like we're putting like a new behavior on trial. Like, where's the preponderance of evidence? Is it for like, gee, when I volunteer to do work where I think I can be valuable, people say yes, and then I contribute value and I get an atta girl from that versus like, no, I wasn't asked to do it. Let me sit here. But like, okay, but wait a minute, maybe if I do that, it's not valuable. So we have to build up enough evidence that tells us that not only creates value for others, it creates value back for ourselves. Like I can be good at it. And I just think of like piling up evidence and building a support structure. And we all know what happens when we try something too big. We tend to be bad at it. Like
Mhm.
most new behavior, we are instantly bad at. So we try something new. Well, it didn't work. Well, probably because you weren't very good at it. You were wobbly. And when we build evidence like, well, I failed massively at that, then we retreat back to old behavior. But if we can
Mhm.
experiment with what's the smallest change we can make that will allow us to test this out? And then build evidence. And once we pile all that evidence together, we make a case to ourselves. Like
Mhm.
actually,
A case to ourselves. That's great.
and there's also a place where we need to make a case to others. But I think we first have to make a case for ourselves or we backslide.
Talk about that piece, because I think one of the things I like about your writing is it's so real. It comes also from your many years as a leader, but the whole idea you say to elevate and evidence your contribution. It's not bragging, but it's not hiding your light under a bushel either. I think
Mm,
it'd be very helpful for coaches to hear what are some of the kind of questions you would ask someone or things you would share to help that, because if you do the great work and nobody knows,
yeah.
it's not really going to help your career, but you don't want to be a jerk either.
Yeah. Oh, it's one of the my constant worries through this whole process is what about the person who is doing all the right things but goes unseen, unheard? Maybe their work is behind the scenes. Maybe they come from an underrepresented group in that workplace. And I think there's an important role for making sure that the value we create is both received but
Mhm.
also perceived. Meaning, if we
Mhm.
deliver value and nobody notices, is our work valuable? And so sometimes we
Like
have
that.
to help that along. There's a few metaphors that I always use metaphors to help me understand what this looks like. And I think of what a great waiter who operates in the background and provides this service. But every now and then that waiter comes into the foreground and says things like, I put a rush on that order to make sure that you get to your performance on time. You know what? I've just taken the liberty of taking that off the bill. It's a little too late. What they're saying is, I'm here to serve, but I also want to let you know that I'm serving you. And they do it with, they don't with shameless promotion. They just evidence for you where they are
Mm.
creating value. And of course, they often do it right before they bring you the bill,
Mm. But
which is
but, give us an example of that. This is so good. What would be a non-metaphor example? Like, I've just done a project, I've worked really forever on this PowerPoint that somebody else delivered. What would be sort of a gracious way where I could elevate and evidence what I've done?
it might be that you just simply say, that meeting where we raised all these escalated issues. I just wanted to let you know that I've taken care of all 8 of them. You don't need to worry about it. It's
I've
not
got this, kind of.
I've got this. And so it's not like just doing a lot of people would do it quietly and they wouldn't even know, oh, that went away.
Mm.
See, a lot of times there's work where the value of the work is that nobody knows about it. Fire alarms aren't going off. And so it's just letting people know, oh, by the way, I've handled that. You know what? I met with these other people and they're on board, just letting you know. So it's not this detailed report of, let me tell you everything amazing I've done. It's
Mhm.
a lot of it is FYIs, much like that waiter.
Mhm. A person here saying, I'm noticing direction this discussion is taking. How does this apply specifically to high impact people? And I would think these are some of the practices that can make you a high impact person. And, we also heard that 20/80, the 20% of the people make 80% of the contribution.
Mm,
And so I'm hearing this is how you can get from the being one of the 80% to one of the 20%.
mhm. Yeah, and I think it's a set of practices that's available to everyone. Carol, I really like your takeaway from the book is it's an it's democratizing success, meaning that you don't have to be the smartest in the room or the most talented, that
Mhm.
the mindsets and practices that you bring to the workplace can be the cause of a lot of the success that you experience. And it's available to anyone who's willing to take other people's perspective into account, to find opportunity amongst threat, to, take the lead when other people are waiting and following.
Thank you. So we are at the end of our time. So guys, sometime last year, Liz and I did this on her book Multipliers, which is equally fabulous. That was on the New York Times bestseller list, and they're wonderful. So Liz, thank you a ton, and you got to write another book and come back.
Oh, please don't make me go write another book to get to talk to you again. Please, no.
Okay, let's talk next week.
But thanks for the conversation, and thanks to everyone who joined us.